So you know it's going to be a good video when it starts off with a chicken, a goat, and a vegetable. So why do we start off with that? Because this is engineering economics, right? What's the economic part? So if I had 3 chickens and 2 goats and I came to you and you had 2 goats and 3 chickens, right? And I want to trade, I want vegetables, right? And you offer me goat milk, then that's not going to help me. Or you offer me eggs, I already have chickens. So we would have to meet at the right time and under the right circumstances in order to trade for something. Because I want something, you want something, but we may not have the resources to make that. So that's where, and most of the time when you say economics, people think of money. But the money itself is a derivative or an outcome of economics, right? It's a way for us to trade resources and make the most out of resources without being constrained to the right time and the right circumstance, right? People don't collect money for its intrinsic value. It's just paper, or it's just electrons and ones and zeros now. And so we collect money because of its efficiency, because we can use it for trade of resources. And this includes time. Right, there was a time when you could take money, this is a tangent, but you could take money to the bank, right, and say, you know, I have this money and I want gold, right, and they would give it to you, or at least a little bit of gold, and that was called the gold standard. Now we came off the gold standard for various reasons, but the point is that this money now doesn't even have the gold standard behind it. It just has our belief in what it can do, which is that we can use it to get resources we don't have, or more resources of what we do have, right? So that's the benefit, and that's why everyone thinks of money when it comes to economics. But what economics is really about, right? Economics is really about efficiency in trade, right? It's about outcomes. So there are different ways of thinking about this, right? If we had, one way of thinking about it is if we have 100 chickens and we have 10 people, then each person should get 10 chickens per person, right? Now, the other way of thinking about that is there are 100 chickens and 100 goats, and you let 20 people, right? You let 20 people work it out as best amongst themselves. Maybe one of them hates chickens. Maybe one of them's allergic to goats. And therefore, they will work out the optimum trade between themselves if you just leave them alone, right? Which is, you know, in very broad strokes, communism versus capitalism, right? So, why do I mention that? Because this video is on public sector, right? When it comes to what we've looked at prior to this, or when it comes to private sector, right? Private sector, what do we care about? Right? What's our goal? Our goal is to increase our rate of return, right? Our goal is essentially to make money. And as mentioned, we make money so that we can do other things with that, including making more money. But the end goal is because that money allows us to get things, whether it's to retire and live on a boat, because that gives us time, whether it gives us more money to get more stuff, or whether it's money for stuff, right? So our goal, and of course it could be to expand your business, which is just to get more of this over again, right? But the point is that in private sector, right, these businesses, we're looking at our rate of return, right? We're looking at a return on investment, and we want to maximize that, right? Now in public sector, we're talking about the general public. We're talking about governments and municipalities. And in public sector, they're not out necessarily to make money, right? Nobody's taking your taxes. Well, some people are. But the way it should work, right, is taxes from everyone. All right, so here's our 20 people again. All right, times. So we got our 20 people. They're paying their taxes. That goes into a giant pot of money, right, which should be used for the benefit of everyone, right? So this is for the benefit of society, whatever we're talking about, city government, state government, national government. So this is supposed to benefit the population as a whole. So this isn't about maximizing money. It's not bad. Well, it is in a way, but it's not about maximizing return on investment. It's not about maximizing rate of return. We're maximizing return on investment in terms of its benefit. So in order to maximize, the counter to maximizing benefit is minimizing cost, or doing the most that we can with this cost. So instead of focusing on rate of return or return on investment, we're focusing on return on investment in terms of the benefits versus the costs. Right? That's what it comes down to for public sector. So that is to say that when we have projects, if the benefits divided by the costs is greater than or equal to 1, then this is a viable project. Doesn't necessarily mean we do it right away. We'll see how to compare projects against each other. But one thing you can say is that if you were to quantify the benefits versus the costs and it comes out less than 0, then you're not going to do it. This is a project not worth pursuing. So before we had a MAR, right? So let's go back to the private sector. Right? In the private sector, we had a MAR, and it was MAR versus our rate of return, right? So you say, I'm going to make 10% per year. And then you go through some cash flow and analysis in order to determine its present worth or whatever. In order to determine what? In order to determine rate of return, right? And if that rate of return is greater than or equal to your MAR, you do it. So now in the public sector, it's kind of like saying, okay, we're going to evaluate this differently, but it's kind of like saying our MAR is 1 in a way. And that once we do our analysis, if this is greater than 1, viable, right? If not, no go. So that's the go, no go criteria for the public sector. You're going to consider yourself as working for some type of government or utility, right? You're there for public benefit, right? You're serving the general public. So how do you go about selecting projects? Right, so this is our algorithm for evaluating public sector projects, right? Of course, every project needs a goal, right? Whether you're building a museum and your goal is informal education and entertainment and recreation, or whether you're building a bridge for transport or whatever. And in order to do that, right, so you got to identify your goals, the constraints and variables, right, on achieving that, which of course includes your budget, and then from that, identify alternatives. Now, when we first start looking at public sector projects, we're just going to evaluate them one at a time, and then later we'll learn how to evaluate one against the other against the next. But what's important is you identify alternatives, you determine what the interest rate is. So eventually we're going to get to bonds. So if this is a bond-funded project, what inflation is going to be, all these sorts of things. And then you determine the life cycle of that alternative, each one of them, and then you choose which is best, right? And when it comes to analysis, right, the first analysis you do is individual, right? So project 1 is the benefit versus the cost greater than 1. If not, it's not an alternative, if it's less than 1. If it's greater than 1, it's an option, right? And then later, once you have all your options and you've verified, then you're going to compare the benefits versus the cost of 1 versus 2, and so on and so on and so on, in a way that we'll go over. Now conceptually, you should be following me here, and it's not too difficult, right? But when we talk about benefits versus cost, right, the mechanism for solving that is that we're going to have different types of cash flows. And before we can calculate or do some kind of number crunching, we have to know whether this is a benefit, a disbenefit, or cost, and what the difference is. So there are different ways of looking at that, but the basic equation for this is going to be benefits minus disbenefits divided by cost. Right? Benefits is easy to conceptualize, right? You're going to build a hospital, and in so doing, right, your constituents, all the public, is going to benefit by quicker, better, more modern, and medical service, right? But let's say in order to build that hospital, you have to tear apart part of a park or nature preserve or whatever. And so now you have this environmental impact. Or let's say it was going to be a shopping center, and that shopping center was going to house businesses, and it's going to generate taxes. And since you're building this hospital, public hospital, then those taxes and those revenues and those stores are lost. So that would be a disbenefit to society. You see, now that loss isn't like it comes out of your bank, but it's money that never did come to your bank. Now, money that comes out of your bank for the construction of the hospital is a cost. Now let's think about this, right? So we're going to build this hospital, which I just made up this example. We're going to build this hospital. So there's the construction cost. That's certainly a cost. But then every year, right, there's going to be maintenance on this. Now, if this is a public hospital, depending on how this hospital is funded, right? But if this is a public hospital, every year you're going to have to do maintenance, and you might have to do some upgrades and keep this thing going. Now, is the annual operating cost and maintenance of this hospital a cost? Or is that, because think about it from the constituent's point of view, right? Once you build this and it's a public asset, right? This is a public asset, meaning it's owned by the public and maintained by the public. Then this becomes a burden to maintain in a way, right? You're getting benefits from it, but now every year you've got an obligation. And so some people would view that as a disbenefit to society, right? Because you're taking on this burden. So if you have a 15-year-old who doesn't get to vote on whether this hospital is built, and then 15 years later when he's 30, he has to pay taxes to keep this thing going, that person could view that as a disbenefit, right? You're obligating that person to something. Now, this could be anything, right? Any kind of public asset. So you could evaluate this B over C, right? This benefit to cost ratio in different ways. I could choose to have my annual operating costs and maintenance be a cost. I mean, it is in the name. Or I could choose to have and view it as a disbenefit, and it will make a difference, in some cases anyway, on how you tabulate that. So we will say that the standard way of doing this in this video or in problem solving, the standard BC is just going to be all the costs rolled into C, right? So that would be just like it looks, B over C. The modified, right? So the modified version will be those people who view this annual portion as being a disbenefit. So then that would be evaluated as such. Now, anytime we're going to do any calculation, whether in public or private sector, you can never add and subtract values unless what? Unless they're in the same year. So you can choose future worth, you can choose annual worth, you can choose present worth, but all of these values have to be matching before you can calculate what the BC is. It doesn't matter which you choose. There may be reasons why you want to look at it in present worth, right? If you need a bond, people want to know how much is this going to cost. And you're going to say, well, $100 million. That $100 million, that's present worth. Or it's going to cost the average taxpayer $10 million for the next 15 years. Well, that's an annual worth, right? So you can choose how. So let's look at this and then decide, is this a cost, a benefit, or a disbenefit? So you make, let's kind of like what we were talking about here. Let's say we're going to build a park with some wetlands, and we're going to have a gazebo, and it's going to be a nice place for people to come, and it'll be a place for different species to live and be protected. But in order to do so, you have annual maintenance, upkeep, and program management, right? Or you have annual parks development budget. So you made this estimate of the annual cost, you made this estimate of the annual budget, right? And so you could view this, if we're going to do a standard view of this, let's say from the city's perspective, right? This is going to be a cost, right? And this is going to be a cost. Now, you could be the type of economist that argues this is a burden being placed upon society, and this is disbenefit. This is a disbenefit. Annual loss in commercial development. Right now, annual loss in commercial development. So we built this wetlands instead of a parking garage, right? And so since there's no parking garage, there's no private company making business, and there's no taxes and whatever. So this, no matter whether you're using the standard or the modified, is going to be a disbenefit, right? This isn't a cost you incurred. This money wasn't taken out of your bank, but it's a cost in something you did not receive, right? It's kind of like an opportunity cost. And so this is the way of including this opportunity cost. So even in the standard model, there can be a minus D in there. It's just not this one. It's not the annual maintenance. But it is a disbenefit, right? This annual loss is a disbenefit. So the standard and the modified have disbenefits. It's just how do you choose what's a disbenefit? In some problems, it'll say, use the standard method or use the whatever modified method. Now, sales tax rebates not realized. This is much like this loss in commercial development, right? This is not realized. So this isn't money that came out of our bank, but it is opportunity cost, which is to say it would be a disbenefit to us. Now, annual municipal income from park use. Okay, so we built this preserve, and we're going to charge people an entry fee. And over here next to this duck pond or whatever is a baseball field, right? And then there's playground and whatever. So people come in and pay to get in here, or they derive some benefit, right? And so there is some income here. So from the city's perspective, right, this would be a benefit, right? This thing is making money for the city, so it's going to be a benefit. Now, what about from the individual's perspective, right? So here's the citizen, and the citizen paid tax money to build this preserve, and then when they come to participate, they have to pay again. So they may not view that as a benefit, right? So one thing to keep in mind for this is the perspective. Oops, that's an excellent S. So the perspective, right, that we're taking in this case is we're the city engineer or the city decision maker or whatever. Now, savings and flood control projects. So we built this lovely park, right? So we built this park, expertly drawn here, and it has wetlands, it has a pond, and what we didn't build was the shopping center or whatever, parking garage. And if we had, we would have had a flooding problem. We would have had a water control problem. And we would have had to deal with that year after year. Estimated here, years 3 through 10. So this is something that did not occur. Right? We have wetlands and nature is taking care of it for us. So this would be viewed as a benefit for us. Right? Property damage not incurred due to flooding. So this would be a benefit for us. Now from the city's perspective, right, this is a benefit. And from the individual's perspective, right, this would be a benefit if you live nearby. Right? So now we go through, and so what we would do here is we would go through and identify each of these. Benefit, cost, whatever. And this is an annualized cost, right, for bonds. So let's say this is the construction cost to build this whole thing properly. Right, so this will be our cost. Right, now what do we do? Well, this one's annual. This one is annual, but only years 3 through 10. This one's annual is 5 through 10, 8 through 10. So we can't just take all of these B's and C's and D's and add them up right away. We have to find a commonality, right? We can say we're going to do annual worth for years 1 through 15. Or we can say we're going to do present worth in year 0 or whatever. And then we convert each one of these, right, into whatever method we choose. And then we come back and plug it into B minus D divided by C and see if that's greater than or equal to 1. And that's how we make our decision. So we're going to, or at least we're considering building a 5,000 kilowatt hour power plant. The plant's going to be used at 50% of its capacity. The rest of the capacity is going to be lost. So this requires a $5 million investment. Operation and maintenance costs are estimated at 75 grand per year. Electricity is 5 cents a kilowatt hour, and the economic life of this is 35 years. We have a discount rate of 8%, which is to say we estimated the cost of this, or the rate for evaluation, is 8%. And so what do we do? Well, we're going to say this is a public sector project, right? So since this is public sector, we're going to evaluate the benefits over the costs and see if that comes out greater than or equal to 1, and then we'll know this is a viable option for us to consider for the benefits of society. Right? We could choose AW, we could choose PW, we could choose FW, doesn't matter. So we have a lot to break down here though. So let's consider this thing is going to run 24/7, which is to say 24 hours per day and 365 days per year, right? And what are we going to get out of this thing? Well, we're going to get 5,000 kilowatts per hour. You should be able to see now why I started off choosing hours, because now my units are going to start canceling each other. Because what do I want? I want some dollar value that I can evaluate, right? How do I get the dollar value? Well, it's 5 cents, right? So it's 0.05. So now I have my dollars, right? And that's per kilowatt hour, right? So that's kind of like saying per kilowatt per hour. Oops. So what do we get? Oh, and we can't forget that this is running at 50%, right? So 0.5. So if that's the case, we end up with 1095. Nope, bigger than that, right? That'd be 1095K per year, right? Now, what is that? That's what this is going to generate, right? So from the public perspective, this is money coming in. Of course, one of the benefits is, we're providing electricity to our constituents, but we're generating money off of that. So this would be a benefit from our perspective. Now it says here, this thing's going to cost $5 million. So what type of value is this? This is AW, right? So this is my AW benefit. So now I need my AW cost, which would be 5 million. But I'll go ahead and just keep my units the same by saying it's 5,000K. And then A given P, 8% is what we're evaluating this at, and for a while, which would be 35 years. Now we're not done there. Operations and maintenance costs are estimated at 75 grand per year, so I would need that to be plus 75. Okay, my units, okay. Alright, so AW costs come out to be around 504K. So you mathematicians would already see the answer is going to be B over C is definitely greater than 1. In this case, it's greater than 2. So it's going to be a viable project. Now, what if you're that economist or engineering economist that says, wait a second, this is a burden on society, right? The annual operating cost of maintenance is a burden on society. Then what are we going to do? Then we're going to say, okay, fine. It looks like this, where this is the annual operating cost. So if that were the case, we would have 1095 minus 75 divided by, I guess I'd have to calculate that out for a second here, 429. So that also is greater than 1. It's also greater than 2. So it's still viable, whichever way you look at it. Whether annual operating costs are included as a cost or included as a disbenefit. Now, that's a simplified example, right? We could complicate our lives, kind of like we did in this table, by looking at what are the opportunity costs, what else could have been done. So let's look at building a sports complex, publicly funded, publicly owned, and we're a county with 2 different cities. So we're going to decide where to put this, but the costs, benefits, and so on are different per location. All right, so what do? So the first thing we do is evaluate them individually. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to look for the BC for Springfield, right? And if that is greater than or equal to 1, then it remains as an option. Then we're going to do that same thing for Shelbyville, and if that's greater than or equal to 1, then it's an option also. If they're both greater than 1, they're both viable, then we have to pit one against the other. Now, this is the first cost, meaning present worth. This is maintenance and operations per year, so annual worth per year, and then they have different lives. So you should have learned by now that if you're going to evaluate these at present worth, then you would have to do it at the least common multiple. So that means we would have to use a 20-year time frame, and we would have to double this one. Springfield, right? Or we could just choose what? To compare this based on an annual worth basis, and then we don't have to worry about it, right? So being lazy, that is to say efficient, I would choose annual worth to evaluate these. So let's look at Springfield. All right. So obviously this is a cost, maintenance and operation. So let's say we're going to view this in the standard way. If we're going to view this in the standard way, that's a cost. This is by definition a benefit, and this is by definition a disbenefit. So somebody's done the work of clustering for us and spelling it out. Now, annual worth of the costs. Right, so this first cost is needing to be translated, right, or converted. So 320, okay. A given P, it's evaluated at 10%. And for how long? 10 years. And then that's going to be added into 45, right? There we go. Now notice, since we're dealing with quantitative measures, we're dealing with the magnitudes here, because if we were to count costs as negative, right, then this would always be less than 1 because it's negative, right? So we're dealing with the magnitudes here when we evaluate these. Now, the other nice thing about choosing annual worth is that this and this are already in annual worth. So there's nothing left to do except say benefits, annual worth, minus disbenefits, annual worth, divided by costs, annual worth. So then I would have 110 minus 20 divided by whatever this cost is. So that would be divided by 52. So you mathematicians would tell me that is greater than 1. So this is in fact viable. So Springfield, viable. Right? Now we have to do the same with Shelbyville, and it would be the same approach. Right? The only difference there is this would be, so this is for Shelbyville now. So Shelbyville is in yellow. Right? So that would be 540K, A given P, 10%, 20 years. Right? And then that plus 35, which reminds me that this should be plus 45. So it's 97. Now things are getting interesting, right? Because this is not 52. Notice this in white for Springfield is 97, which is to say this part of it is 52 plus 45 is 97. So now we have 90 divided by 97, and you mathematicians would tell me that this is in fact less than 1. Right? So since this is less than 1, then that means, we'll go to red, Springfield is out. Right? We don't even need to consider it anymore because it's less than 1. So it's not worth pursuing. So if we were to look and finish Shelbyville, then what do we have? Then we have Shelbyville. The benefits minus, so the benefits are 150 minus the disbenefits, which is 45, divided by 99. So this would be 105 divided by 99 greater than 1. So our only option that's viable in this case is to put it in Shelbyville. We don't even have to compare them against each other.